First, have you lost faith in the BBC following the Huw Edwards scandal? 0207 862 2222 is the number. Edwards, who was formerly the top newsreader at the BBC, faces jail now because yesterday he admitted accessing indecent images of children. He received 41 images between December 2020 and August 2021 in a WhatsApp conversation with a man called Alex Williams, 25, who's also now a convicted paedophile. 7 were of the most serious type. 2 of those feature a child aged between 7 and 9. Edwards did not make, keep or forward any of the images. During the period, he twice asked not to be sent any underage or illegal images, but only stopped receiving them after the second request. He was suspended by the BBC in July 2023 following allegations in The Sun that he'd paid a young person for sexually explicit images, a separate case where no evidence of criminal behaviour was found. The BBC said yesterday it was shocked by the abhorrent behaviour revealed in court. It admitted knowing of Edwards' arrest for serious offences in November, but they continued paying his salary of between £475,000 and £480,000 a year up until he resigned on medical advice in April, which is, 5-6 months later. And that was 2 months before he was charged. The Director General of the BBC is expected to be challenged on that decision at an emergency meeting demanded by the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy. Right, there's a lot there. What's your reaction to all that, Andrea?
I mean, I think he should be locked up. I've got no sympathy for anybody who's downloading or having porn to do with children. And I think the way that the BBC handled it was not obviously correct. And I've been part of the Defund the BBC campaign, you know, as an MP I was for many years. And it's just awful. And they should have acted sooner. But we've seen quite often how people look after their own, which the BBC do.
Obviously, I declare my interest in that. I work at Radio 2, so I can't really extract that from my presence here.
No, of course.
What do you think, Jemma? Because, I mean, I suppose when you look at the BBC's reaction, initially when it was in The Sun, it was about Edwards having a connection
Something
with a young
legal,
man, but not underage. The BBC suspended him and he was basically gone, but still being paid. A number of people then said Edwards had been badly treated. Now we discover he is a serious paedophile and he should have been fired at the first opportunity.
I don't understand how the BBC is supposed to have psychic powers. I mean, I've been on this show for many years and, you know, believe it or not, Andrea, we all get on here and all like each other. But if I went home today and had sexual intercourse with a dog, and then my neighbour phoned the police and said, Gemma's had sexual intercourse with my dog, it was awful. And then that came out, I think you'd be really shocked, I hope. I mean, I'd be shocked and you'd be shocked.
It's quite an odd example to choose.
But would it be your fault? I don't think so.
Would it be my fault? Oh, I
think that would be my fault as an individual. And what would happen is the minute you heard that, you'd say, well, you're not coming back on the show again. And that would be that. What happened?
But also, there's 2 ways. Look, Dan Wootton's case was at around the same time. And now the way the media piled on him was so different to the way they handled the Huw Edwards situation. And I came out on social media defending Dan, saying innocent until proven guilty, because I do believe that. And I had BBC employees piling on me.
Because he wasn't suspended.
No, but I had BBC employees piling on me saying, how can he defend, you know, that man for what he's done? And I said, innocent and proven guilty. Yeah. And let's face it.
You think it's a different standard?
Yes, completely.
Okay.
So wait a minute, so the standard...
Before we go on, let's have a look at the timeline here, because then I'm going to bring in Jenny Bond. So just to be absolutely clear here, he might have been on the way out here, but then he became so high profile after the Queen sadly died and his coverage and so on, he signed a 3-year deal. He then has all these big events here in 2023, but then we have the story in The Sun and he is suspended. And if you remember, we weren't allowed to name him for a while, and these kind of strange rules about privacy and so on. His wife then names him July the 12th, again 2023. Now, all of that was known until about a week ago. It turns out now that in November, Edwards was arrested. And the BBC was told that in confidence. We did not know that. 2024, they apologised to the young person's family. This is in story 1. He resigns in April. In June, he's charged in the separate case, And then yesterday he pleads guilty and, as Andrea says, may face jail. July 23, we then have, July the 23rd, 2024, BBC's annual report reveals how much they paid him. And I think somebody's calculated they paid him £200,000 after they knew he'd been arrested on these very serious charges. That, by the way, is the Daily Mail graphic. Joining us is the former BBC newsreader and royal correspondent, Jenny Bond. Jenny, it's whether the BBC, when they knew he'd been arrested, could say, that is it, you're fired.
Yeah, it's all extremely hurtful, distasteful and sad, isn't it, for everyone involved? But I think in all of this, we shouldn't forget a point that my colleague, another presenter, Nikki Campbell, has been making in all of this, at the centre of all of this, is children who have not just been subject to pornography, as it's called, but child abuse. And I think that is what we should be talking about as much as who said what at the BBC. But yes, the BBC said yesterday that they were shocked when they heard he'd been charged, and that they had taken the decision earlier this year, having known that he had been arrested on suspicion of serious charges, offences. They had taken the decision that if and when he was charged and was in employment at the BBC, they would then fire him. I fail really to see the difference in that. Presumably, they are thinking of the presumption of guilt. You are innocent until proven guilty. But that point could stand whether you are arrested or whether you are charged. So I think there are very many questions for Tim Davie and the management of the BBC to answer, and answer it they will have to today when they meet Lisa Nandy.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Go on, Jemma, sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Jenny said. And going back to your original point, Jenny, absolutely at the heart of this, children, it doesn't bear thinking about. And I agree with you, Andrea, it's just vile. But I also think that obviously there are contracts that we don't know about. There's a legal team there. And so I don't know why he was still getting paid, but maybe that was something because he hadn't been charged yet.
You could fire the guy. The lawyers will say, in the BBC, will say you can't fire him because of employment law. You could say as the BBC, I'm sorry, this is so disgusting. We're firing him and let him take a case against us.
Yeah.
Because do you know what? He wouldn't really be able to.
Yeah. Wasn't he in hospital at the time?
Well, I don't know. Well, there's that as well. Is that a factor, Andrea, that, as Jemma says, that he was mentally ill? He says.
But this is just too horrific for that to matter to me. I just think that they should have.
It was reported he was suicidal.
No, but look at the Daily Mail with Dan. They stopped his contract, didn't they? With Dan Wootton, with his case. He proved that the police dropped the case in the end.
But he was still broadcasting on GB News with all those things swirling
I'm just saying,
around.
It's down to...
But
the Daily Mail got rid of him, didn't they?
Yeah.
So, but it's down to the employer.
So you see it as a difference then? Okay.
He chose not to do it. Yeah.
All right, well, maybe the BBC was fairer than GB News was. I don't know. I mean, it's a very different case, the Dan Wootton case. Lynn in Glasgow, hi.
Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, Paul.
This is about whether, obviously, Huw Edwards has done disgusting things, may go to jail. The BBC's washed its hands of him. But has some of this rubbed off on the BBC?
Yes, I think so. I pay my licence fee. I always have paid my licence fee. And it makes me sick to my stomach to think that my money has went into the pocket of a paedophile. Now, what should have happened, as far as I'm concerned, is he should have been suspended with no pay and waited for the due course to take place. But why was he still paid? He should have been suspended with no pay, because at the end of the day, it is British payers' money that's going into his pocket, and I don't want to be funding a paedophile.
Well, it's 200 grand since his arrest. I mean, Jenny, could they... this is a kind of legal point, I suppose. I'm not expecting you to know, but we both know the BBC. Could they try and recoup the money? Could they cancel his pension?
Well, frankly, I think if Hugh has any dignity left, then he would hand some of the money back. Certainly the 200 grand he has made since his arrest. So I think it would be gracious of him to do that. I don't think there's any legal recourse for the BBC. And I think also we need to remember that, the BBC as a whole is being tarnished, and, reputationally, this is very, very damaging, of course. But I think you and I both know, Jeremy, that the newsroom, the news division, is quite rightly and thankfully quite separate from the corporation itself. I know it's quite a hard division for people to make, but we in the news, without fear or favour, question the bosses at the BBC. And that's entirely right. So in the newsroom themselves, they were kept in the dark right until this week, which is extraordinary. But I think we have to remember that.
Yeah, it is. It's very odd. It's all very well having a separation, but if one bit of the BBC hears something newsworthy, you think they should probably communicate it to the news bit. But they, as you say, they're completely separate. Yes. Jenny, thank you so much. Thank you very much for coming on. After the break, we're taking more of your calls on whether you've lost trust in the BBC after the Huw Edwards scandal. 0207 862 222. Now, let's have some more calls on this awful story about Huw Edwards. 0207 862 222. Has it started to weaken your faith or destroyed your faith in the BBC? William is in Clackmannanshire. Hello, William.
Good morning, Jeremy.
What do you think?
It hasn't affected my trust in the BBC. There's already been previous instances like this, and in any large organisation, there is going to be misbehaviour. In terms of what the BBC can do, I think they need to address the culture. And one thing I think the BBC should do is to remove the statue produced by Eric Gill. It was a long time ago. It was 1932, and that statue is not palatable. It's a symbolic. It would be a symbolic thing for the BBC to do.
Sorry, to be clear, Eric Gill, the sculptor, abused members of his family, and we gather the family dog as well. So he is not he's not a nice person is an understatement.
My word.
I know, but his statue's on the front of the building. That's true, but it's a bit. Would that not just be seen as virtue signalling, William? It's more important to keep children safe in the present day, right?
It is, but it would be an important and significant symbolic gesture. And people like yourself who work at the BBC could lobby for this, because if that was to be implemented today, people wouldn't have it because of the information. And when it was erected, people didn't know that Eric Gill had sexual relations with his sister, his dog, his daughters. So it must be removed. And the fact that it isn't implies that this sort of culture is acceptable. And I think that's what this is. It's an organisational culture problem.
OK, thank you very much. Joanne in Cambridge, what do you think?
Hi. I think that the BBC have hid lots of things, especially the Jimmy Savile and everything else. And I think that they shouldn't have paid him at all. He shouldn't have had any salary. He should have been suspended with no salary.
They will say that the law stops them doing that because they suspended him protectively while they were finding out what was going on. Because it was a story in The Sun, do you remember, originally? And then credit to them for breaking it. They did a good job. And so the BBC said to him, right, you can't come in the office, but we will still pay you. And I think they expected him to resign, actually. And they were quite shocked that he never resigned in the last year, because a lot of other people would have said, this is unfair on the BBC to keep drawing your pay when there's no question of you ever working for the BBC again.
Yeah.
And quite why he didn't resign, particularly when he knew he was guilty. Sorry, now I'm getting cross about it. He knew he was guilty. So he says to the BBC, oh, by the way, I've been arrested.
Yeah.
We need to find out if the BBC said, what for and are you guilty?
Absolutely. And
if he said to them, yes, it's for these serious offences, but I'm not guilty, then I would think you could start to take action to get the money back. Mm-hmm. Because that clearly is a lie. He's admitted he's guilty.
And he obviously knew he was
But
up to all of that
I don't know
stuff.
whether the BBC asked him. I don't know whether they said, are you guilty? Because you can't justify paying him beyond November if you know he's guilty.
Yes.
Also, is there procedure legally where you can't ask questions like that because it would jeopardise a
and it may have
potential
the
trial?
information may have come from an intermediary who says, I've got no more information than this. Huw has been arrested. Joanne, what a mess. And the poor BBC at the centre of this is, it has terrible moments, but it also is, I know we'll disagree on this, Andrea, there are precious reasons why we don't want it to go down the Swanee.
I feel like that. You've got all that
I
radio,
don't want it to go down the Swanee.
Do you want to defund it, right?
I want to defund it with British taxpayers' money, but I don't want it. I think they should do like other broadcasters and get advertising private funding.
No. Listen, I know that.
I don't want to see it lost. Yeah.
No, but I mean that would be the end of BBC Radio. But listen, that's not the day to defend it because this is a bad week. And I couldn't believe yesterday when I heard that the BBC had been told about it in November.
No.
Thanks, Joanne. Jackie in London, does this rub off on the BBC?
No, because I think they didn't know what was going on, and he wasn't. Even though he was arrested, he wasn't proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at the law says unless you're proven guilty, you're innocent before proven guilty.
Yeah, but my point is that you ring him up and you say, OK, we've heard you've been arrested. Are you guilty? And are you going to plead guilty? He may say, I'm not answering. Yeah.
He might say, I'm not answering because he doesn't want to jeopardise his case.
What did you think of his manner? We've just seen his pictures of him outside the court. What did you think of his manner yesterday?
I think he's a horrible man. I think he's basically a money-grabbing man. He grabs money. I think the BBC needs to do a lot more, not investigation, before they employ anyone. It's like I'm a nurse. Every year I have to do an RCB check, criminal check, to see if I can work with people with my patients.
Oh, a CRB check, yeah.
And I think the same thing for anyone who works in the public service.
Yeah, but
should be checked.
Of course, Jackie, Jimmy Savile would have sailed through that. Jimmy Savile wrote a book called Stranger Danger. These guys are very plausible. Huw would have sailed through a CRB track.
But I think now that we know about these people, because I'm a nurse. If you ever go on the website, Nursing Midwifery Council, you always see cases against nurses all the time. If you go on and they're always some of the cases that are horrible.
You're always going to get bad eggs.
No, I hear you. And maybe there needs to be more of a kind of regular appraisal of people's moral standing.
But like you say, how do you do that? I mean, from all purposes, he looked like a very upstanding pillar of the community, didn't he? The way he came across,
I knew him quite well. I knew him as
the royal coverage.
He wasn't a particularly nice guy, but he's a father of 5. And I didn't look beyond his family.
No,
and I'm sure his own family didn't either, by the way.
You wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. No, and I think it's part of a sort of decent humans. Actually, tend to take people as we find them. We're not trying to.
My hairdresser yesterday said he didn't look very remorseful, and I think.
Well, I think there are questions about his behaviour on his way into the court. Actually,
definitely.
Look, so we've got loads of calls on this. We'd love to hear from you. We'll take a few more after the break. Have you lost trust in the BBC after the Huw Edwards? Take some more calls on this dreadful Huw Edwards business because lots of viewers are calling in. Christopher in Kent. Your turn, Christopher.
Oh, good morning, everybody. Well, to be fair, I actually lost faith in the BBC quite a long time ago. This is just another example of a long line of failure with the Jimmy Savile. But also, there are people like Jo Brand, who still are on the BBC, and she came up with the suggestion of throwing battery acid over Nigel Farage. Yeah. Then you've got Miriam Margolyes, who wished death on Boris Johnson, and they're still at the BBC. Why is that? But also, it has a clear left.
You would basically you'd get rid of all that. It's a bit. I mean, you've thrown in Jimmy Savile and Miriam Margolyes together there, but
no, but it's all part of that. I mean, you can't have people doing that, behaving in that way. But it's also got a very far left-wing bias. The BBC with its news. I mean, it feels like it's nothing more than the broadcasting arm of The Guardian at times.
Well, Jemma doesn't agree with that.
So, I think it's a dreadful...
Andrea thinks so,
The standard of journalism is absolutely dreadful, inaccurate and totally biased.
What's your source of news? Christopher, if you can stop talking for a second. What's your source of news?
Well, I flick through channels, to be perfectly honest.
This one, obviously.
Sometimes I go to sometimes CNN. Surprisingly enough, I sometimes go to Euronews, although I voted Brexit because I find it quite interesting.
Jemma, you think the BBC is left-wing?
Well, I think they do quite a good job because everybody on the left thinks it's extraordinarily, when it comes to the news coverage, right-wing, i.e. like Laura Kuenssberg seems very biased, and of course Emily Maitlis left because she said she didn't like the fact that Robbie Gibb had been parachuted in and put on the board by Boris Johnson, and he's the man that founded GB News, and he was also Theresa May's director of comms. You've got Davey in there who's donated to the Tory party, so for my money, it needs sorting out the opposite way.
No, but it's like the chap Christopher just said there, that they can get the presenters or whoever can say such outlandish things and some dangerous things. I mean, you were saying about Farage inciting violence. Well, the stuff saying about and throwing battery acid on people, is that not in...
That's the Joe Brand thing.
Yes, exactly.
But I agree with you that comment was disgusting, and I would never say anything like that.
They shouldn't be on air. You know, there should be...
They don't normally do... Yeah, I don't know. They sort of don't do that many lifetime bans. I mean, Edwards will be an example of somebody who do you know,
no, but why
interestingly,
don't they?
with Edwards, they won't be able to show him at all doing anything he's ever done in the past. So they've actually just dealing with the destruction of their own archive here as well, which is a whole other thing. Thank you, Christopher. Point taken. We're open to all calls today.
I think the Savile thing was what? I mean, to be fair, it was about 40
years ago.
I
joined in 87, the BBC, and he was gone by then.
Disgusting bad egg, and it's sort of like...
Well, he's Britain's worst paedophile, basically.
His worst paedophile, yeah, I wrote him loads.
Yeah, but I mean, he was facilitated by a number of national institutions,
absolutely, but
including the BBC, but maybe not knowingly. One thing I would say, and I'm not trying to defend the BBC, is that often good people don't see bad people.
Look at the Catholic Church.
And it's true in the NHS as well.
No,
you know, you've got a lot of good people there. Yeah. Do they see Lucy Letby there?
No.
They just can't believe anyone would do that.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of that with the BBC as well.